Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Understable Discourse, your go-to place for all the stats and analysis in the game. Today, we're going to talk about some fun stuff. We're going to look at the action that happened from this past weekend with a couple events that went down. We're going to talk about the Go Throw Tour for just a hot minute, and then we're going to look ahead this weekend to the Northwest Disc Golf Championship, and finally, to end the show out, after we go through the Hold My Bag picks for the week, we're going to talk real briefly about some of the PDGA rule proposals. So let's get into it. Like I said, thank you for coming back. It's so much fun doing this every single week, and we have a lot to go over this time. This past weekend, we saw an event go down as the first, European swing event of the year at the PDGA Open. And first and foremost, I gotta ask, who out there, of all of you, who did you watch coverage? I'd love to know if you're the kind of person who's consuming non-major European events, and if you do, how do you consume it? Do you try to watch the live? Do you try to watch the live after it's been released, or maybe do you watch MDG Media? What is your way of consuming non-major European events, if you consume it at all? I was extremely impressed with how the course itself looked, and having a castle on the grounds is just, I think, incredibly impressive. It kind of made me imagine how fun it would be to think about, like, if disc golf would have been a game played or invented back in medieval times. And so you've got people doing jousting over here, sword fights over there, playing disc golf on the lawn of the castle. As we know, lawns on castles in medieval times were humongous. So kind of funny to think about. But one thing I will say on a more serious note is that while the course itself was extremely beautiful, it didn't seem to be very difficult or dynamic in the way it was set up. A lot of the holes felt very similar with, the classic, it's a par 4, you've got to play a long shot off the tee, opening yourself up to a shorter placement shot to the basket. And it kind of felt like that was repeated quite a bit. There were some very interesting holes in the course, but for the most part, I don't want to downplay how well some of the players played by saying the course was easy, because comparatively to most of us, the course was not easy in the slightest bit. But when you look at it compared to a lot of other courses that we see, in the European field and the courses that we play here in the United States, I would say this is definitely one of the least, like I said, dynamic courses in terms of different shot types, different hole designs, that kind of thing. Over in the FPO division for the PDGA Open, we saw a really impressive start from Rachel Turton. I know that that's not a name that, if you follow international disc golf, you will probably likely have not have heard of before. Rachel's shown us some pretty solid performances in the past, last year with a couple of the international events, but she jumped out to a very early lead at the end of the first round by going 8 under par. And unfortunately for her and for the field, in round 2, Kristen would kind of hit her stride. She only shot 5 down in the first round, but as we know, with really incredible players with extreme talent, they don't tend to have let a round kind of keep them down. And so in round 2, Kristen came out and she shot an 11 under bogey-free round, sort of catapulting herself into a position where she could sort of lay out the pace for the field. And she did that by putting down a 10 under bogey-free round in round 3, catapulting her to victory, with Silva Saarinen coming in second off the back of a 12 under final round herself. So not to say that this is anything that we didn't expect. Obviously, when you're looking at the European field on the FPO side, you could think of maybe 5 or 6 names that really you would expect a lot of the success to come from. Kristen being the top of that list, Silva being second, kind of Evelina there, and Henna. But Evelina and Henna were not in the field here, so I kind of expected to see Annika Sten come in third, but I think she got 5th. So pretty standard performance, I think, from what we got for the FPO field over at the PDGA Open. When you look at the MPO side, though, this was really just a one-man show. Tied after round 1, shooting a bogey-free 13 under, Ari Vilman decided that he just wasn't done yet, and he decided to waltz into round 2 and outdid himself in round 1 by going 14 under par. this time. And then in round 3, he didn't slow down. I mean, I guess by one stroke, he shot another 13 under round, putting him at a 40 under for the entire weekend with 0, that's right, 0 bogeys to his name across 54 holes. Really, really clean, super competitive, and incredible. And he finished the event leading in 10 different statistical categories, including an extremely impressive 58% from C2 putting. Just a display of consistency and performance across a field that, you know, had a couple decent names in it when it comes to like the European men, and then there were some Americans over there. So a really great finish. It's not a super shocker for us. I mean, we've seen Mari do very well before last year, looking at a top 10 finish at the European Open, and generally a lot of success at most of the European events. And so I'm not surprised to see his name up there. I would love to see him get around to more events. I'd love to see him come over and play some events on U.S. soil. And I believe there were some stipulations in his contract with MVP, I believe, to give him more accessibility to get over to play more American events. So I'd love to see what that's going to look like. Hopefully we get him over there to see him compete against a larger field, because one of the points that was brought up this week that I think is really valuable to understand is that we don't often get to see what the true comparison of the European players to the American players are as often as we'd like to. Maybe the top players of the field, but I think it's really valuable for these European players to get a chance to play amongst the American field, to really give themselves a perspective of, this is where I'm at, this is what I can do to keep surging ahead and getting myself to a point where I can say I'm a top 20 competitor in the world. And we just don't know that until they compete on the same track more than only a couple times a year. Some other notable finishes at the Konopiste Open, we have Niklas Antala coming in at 7th. I'll admit that, yeah, 7th is great, but this is a bit of a disappointment, I think. He's clearing ahead the best player in the field, probably next up behind him, someone like Ezra Aderhold is in that conversation, but Niklas should have won this event or been very close to winning this event. So not the result I think he was looking for, or any of the people who sort of expected him to finish better. But we have Lauri Lehtinen coming in at 2nd, which is a great finish for him, and Vaino Makala coming in at 4th. So it was a pretty impressive showing, I think, from the European field. Obviously, it was a European event, so that would be expected. It was not, on the other hand, a very impressive showing from the American field, with James Conrad coming in at 29th, and Paul Ulibarri and Ezra Aderhold tying at 34th. Clay Edwards in 39th, and then there were a handful of other competitors. I think Eric Oakley finished in like the high 70s. Just not a really solid performance from the Americans who went over to the event itself. But great to see the first event going off on the European side. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more, which we're going to be getting in the upcoming weeks. On almost the literal opposite side of the world, over in Washington State, we had the Go Throw event, the Kayak Point Showdown. Went down with quite a bang this weekend. The FPO division, I would say, not part of that bang, with only 12 competitors and only maybe a couple, 2 or 3 of them being really competitive players. Kat Merch took down the event, closely followed by Jennifer Smiley, who is another FPO competitor who has won a Go Throw event. So I think both of them, we're going to keep seeing them kind of duke it out back and forth at these events if they continue to play them, but just not a lot in the FPO division to sort of push the field, and I would hope to see them grow it more, but right now it doesn't seem like that's the focus of the Go Throw. On the MPO side, though, I think we have to take a moment to stop and just recognize Gannon Buhr's first round. Allegedly, he states that he did not have any warm-up and that Gannon walked up to the tee. I think he said he arrived like 7 minutes before the start, and this 10,000 plus foot course just shot an absolutely blistering course record of 12 under par, bogey free, and it came out in UDisc's rating system as a 364, which is the highest number I think I've ever seen or heard of. It's kind of absurd to think about, and if you use the conversion system that UDisc recommends, this means this round would have been a 1228 rated round, which that's obviously not realistic. In fact, you can kind of tell it's not realistic because the Go Throw Tour is kind of helping us see some of the limitations for the UDisc rating system. And that can be seen by the fact that in round 1 of this event, there would have been 13 1100 rated rounds using that conversion system. So what I think is happening is when you look at maybe the middle of the ratings, for a lot of amateurs and stuff, UDisc ratings can probably make a lot of sense. Looking at how I rate at courses when I play with my UDisc rating compared to how I play the same event with like a sanctioned tournament, I can see they're actually pretty close. But from what I understand, and I think this is the case, is that as you kind of get to the extreme ends of that bell curve, I think it's a bell curve where, it's kind of inaccurate here at the bottom level. It gets more accurate the closer you go to the center of the field, and then it begins to get more inaccurate with the higher skill and the higher rated rounds at the other side. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, and maybe this will help inform UDisc on how to sharpen up this rating system. I'll be curious to see what they do with that, if they choose to do anything with that. Now, not to be outdone by his incredible first round, again, it came out in the second round on a significantly tighter, more difficult wooded course. I had a bit of a hard time watching the second round because even though the course, I love seeing difficult wooded golf. I'm from Pennsylvania, so I really, really enjoy wooded courses. They talked about how the course was only like a couple years in the ground. It still needed a lot of work, and it just felt like there were so many trees in areas where they shouldn't have been. And I'm not suggesting that we have to cut these massively wide fairways into our wooded courses to make lines easier, but there comes a point when it feels like the best players in the world are just throwing at a line of trees hoping to get through, and it becomes less of a this is a skill thing and more of a I'm kind of just throwing it in that direction and hoping I get through. And that's not what we want to see out of the top players in our field. We want to see, maybe if you've got a line of like 4 trees, you're removing the center too. So it's still a very, very tight gap, but there is an area there where a highly skilled player can play to that area, making their shot that much more impressive. So I think I would like to see this course cleaned up a little bit before we come back here for other future Go Throw events. It's definitely far and away clear of being a Pro Tour course. It's just not there in terms of its upkeep and stuff like that, but it's still really beautiful course. Washington woods are always fun to look at, especially with how big the trees can be. Speaking of the Go Throw Tour, I want to take just a moment and talk a little bit about kind of where we're at this season and just some overall thoughts I have. About a week ago, the Go Throw guys came under some fire because of a video that was uploaded to their channel showcasing the 2024 distance contest over at the USDGC. And a few minutes into the video, it became kind of clear and obvious that something was a bit off about the narration. And it was because like some of the sentences were a little oddly structured and a handful of names were being really butchered and mispronounced. I think they were referring to Evelina Salonen as like Evelina Salonen, and it became very clear that they were using some kind of like text-to-speech AI or something like that was being used. And it did come out that AI was used for the video and for that narration, and it kind of sent the comments and just fans into a tailspin, questioning why they just wouldn't have somebody record the audio, especially considering it was over 6 months since the event took place. And so what you would expect most places to do is either take down the video or apologize or something for something that's so nearsighted, I think, because there is a lot of common distrust right now with AI. So it's a bit of an odd play to do it that way when it feels like there was a lot of time to make that change. And I'm curious who at the end of the day approved that video to go out without taking a look at it. So you would expect Go Throw to have like a meaningful response to this, but nope, they kind of did what they always do when it comes to being questioned about things that like just kind of fail. And that's number one, they deflected the cause of the problem to something else by saying that the video was the dream of this other individual and that he was the one who edited it, and kind of being like, we had a deadline that we had to hit, and so that's why this got put out. We're really sorry about that. They also talked about how busy and difficult their job is. Like, I get it. You're running a tour, you're traveling, you're hosting skins matches and all this kind of stuff. But like, I mean, I'm a busy guy. I work every day. I drive multiple hours to get to the office most days. At least recently, I still find time to sit down and do all the things that I'm doing now. I'm certain they could find a disc golfer somewhere who'd be more than willing to sit down and narrate a video. Because if the script was already written and given to like an AI, text to speech thing, and for it to do the narration, they could have easily handed that to a person and had them record. It just, to say that they're too busy, I mean, you're trying to build something here, your business, you got to figure it out, make it work. And then they finished it off by saying that, the classic, like, guys, hey, we put out great content, let's chill, it's just about disc golf, go throw. And so I think they kind of deflect a lot of these problems with like, yeah, I know there's some issues, but look at all the other good stuff that we're doing, and that's just not gonna jive anymore. I mean, I've said before, I want these guys to succeed. I really want Go Throw to have a lot of success because they're going to great courses. I like the vibe they kind of put out, but I'm also the kind of person who's willing to respectfully call their actions into question when it becomes necessary, because it doesn't feel like a lot of people do that. It feels like there's a lot of buddy out there with a number of the different podcasts and people on tour that groups are just unwilling to say, hey, here are problems going on with the Go Throw tour. Or you have the opposite problem where they're saying, this isn't a significant issue, I'm not going to bother talking about it because it's a non-issue for us. But I'm gonna bring it up because I think that somebody has to talk about it. And one of my problems is they keep setting up these promises, and the promises get followed up with letdowns and just underperformance on the back end. Look at this issue with the blatant laziness with the AI. Just a really poor example of decision making. They promised us at the beginning of the year to have FPO coverage. They even, in a couple of videos, were like, you can go find it here. We didn't really get FPO coverage. I feel bad. No wonder they can't get any FPO to play these events, because they're just not getting a chance to be put out there the same way that the MPO are. And I get it. We've talked before about this, that there's more money on the MPO side. I understand that. But if you're not going to really dedicate any resources to FPO, don't tell us that you are. Just be upfront and be like, hey guys, we're going to pour a lot of our time and effort into MPO this year. And over time, once we have success with that, we're going to do the same thing with FPO. But right now, we're going to focus on MPO. No, instead they promise us both, and we only get half of what they promised to be delivered. Another one is they talked about having these events with like the best courses, all your favorite pros, and really awesome prize pools. And that's also not really happening. The events at the beginning of the year started out with some decentish prize pools, but we got to the Masters Invitational where there was supposed to be a $50,000 prize pool with $20K going to the winner, and then we find out, or at least much to their chagrin, we find out that was cut down to $20K for a prize pool because like some of the funding dropped out at the last minute, and they kind of played it off like nothing happened. I almost feel like they were hoping that nobody would notice it. But you guys know, we notice everything over here at Understable Discourse. And then this past weekend, we come back. It's their first event after being back for a little bit. And for all of his incredible play, Gannon only takes home just over $1,600. So we're not getting these big prize pools that everyone's talking about. I think right now this year, they're operating under the grace of a lot of their friends within, the disc golf community as other players. But if this kind of continues, who knows what kind of participation they're going to have. And then lastly, the last thing I'll say about this is they can't get anything done with their website, which is basically unusable most of the time. If there's supposed to be a tour and there's a point system and all that, bring it up and make it easy for people to follow. It's just not. But guys, don't worry. They're really busy, and that's why they haven't been doing it. So I don't know. I feel like someone's got to talk about it, so I'll be that guy. Moving past the Go Throw stuff, let's talk about this upcoming event here this weekend at the Northwest Disc Golf Championship, which is coming in as the second Elite Plus event so far this year, and it's kind of a mashup of the Beaver State Fling and the Portland Open, and I think is almost going to offer us a bit of a preview of what the 2027 Worlds might look like when they come to Oregon here in a couple of years. Now, the courses that we're going to be seeing this weekend First of all, you've got Milo MacIver, which established in 1996 is one of, I think, the longest standing staples of top tier Northwestern disc golf that we have in the country, and just one of the best disc golf courses in the country in general. And it's extremely historic. It's got holes with nicknames that most people on tour know. You know, when you talk about like the Genius Hole, everyone knows you're talking about Milo. Or when you think about some of the biggest moments our sport has ever had, you can remember the video that just went completely around the world of Philo hitting that albatross as the disc just bends around that tree. That happened at Milo. So this course is truly special. It's a place where there's a lot of disc golf history to be found. And partnering up with that almost perfectly is you have the Glendoveer East course, which is going to be used for the third and fourth rounds. And Glendoveer East is the longer of the two sibling courses over there at the Glendoveer Golf Facility, which is going to challenge a lot of like power shots and require extremely impeccable distance control. But this tournament is going to be a great blend of the disc golf history with Milo MacIver and modern innovation with the Glendoveer course. And so it's a really cool mashup of courses. I know there's a bit of concern about like the distance between those courses and what travel looks like for the pros between rounds 2 and 3. I think it's good though that they have, you know, one course at rounds 1 and 2, the other course at rounds 3 and 4, makes the traveling easier instead of going back and forth or anything like that. But when we take a closer look at Milo, it's being used for rounds 1 and 2, and it's going to challenge the shot shaping, the control distance, and just overall consistency of all the players. And it did undergo a few alterations, which we'll talk about here. The course was shortened a bit by about 800 feet for the MPO division and 500 feet for the FPO division. And the par dropped down by 2 as well, mostly because of, I would say, 2 or 3 changes on the back of the course, because they left most of it completely intact. I want to say that like 15 or so holes are just exactly what we're used to seeing. But the first change that we kind of see is on hole 13, where it gets shortened by like 30 feet, 40 feet. So now it's a 197 foot par 3. I think it's one of the shortest holes that we get on tour for either division. But the next of the changes is that the old hole 15. So hole 15 was the one that it was a big par 4 where it was almost like a big horseshoe. That's been divided up into 2 par 3s for the MPO field and a par 3 and a par 4 for the FPO field. Essentially, the way they did it is that each half of the hole for hole 15 has become its own separate hole, and hole 16 now kind of tees off from where a solid landing shot would have been off of old hole 15. So hole 15 cut in half, made into 2 separate holes, and the main reason for that change is that they had to eliminate hole 18 from last year, and so now hole 17 becomes the new hole 18, and that's the hole at the end with the little island kind of on the parking lot thing. And that means the tournament's going to end on a pretty volatile hole. This is the island green par 5 that we saw Luke Humphreys just throw away his chances to win the Beaver State Fling not that long ago, and it's a brutal finishing hole. I kind of like it though, because it's a hole with solid scoring distribution, around like 35% birdie, 30% par, and 35% bogeys or worse. So I do like that about it, and we're only talking about the finishing hole for rounds 1 and round 2. But for the most part, we're getting the Milo that we're used to seeing. And while we lose a very interesting hole 15, I think the course should play pretty much exactly how we've always remembered it. If we hop over to Glendoveer East, we see that this, massive course hasn't really changed that much. It comes in at over 11,000 feet for the MPO and over 9,200 feet for the FPO field. There aren't really too many consequential changes on this layout. Let me kind of run you through a couple of the small changes. They added OB to the far right on hole 3. Hole 4, all the OB was tightened on all sides. On hole 5, the OB was added to the left side, and is probably going to punish errant drives that hyzer out too far left. On hole 6, an OB line was added to the right. On hole 7, an OB line was added to the left and the right. If you picking up what I'm putting down here, the trend that we're seeing, that same type of stuff happens on hole 9, 11, 12, and 17. And so it's clear that they're trying not to do too much to the course in terms of adding or subtracting distance or dramatically changing where you tee off from or where the basket's located. They're just trying to rein in some of the OB to, I think, punish errant shots and forcing competitors to just tighten it up a bit, especially off the tee pad, because before coming out here, players could end up an entire fairway to the left or to the right and still manufacture something to get like a par or even a birdie sometimes. And now I think it's going to help to punish bad drives and reward players for hitting the correct fairway. But like I said, there's not really any significant changes to the course. I do want to highlight one hole of the event though. Hole 18 at Glendoveer East is really one of my favorite finishers on the tour. It's 1,000 feet, it's a par 5, and it's not the hardest hole on the course by any stretch, but it does offer one of the widest scoring windows that we've seen, with last year players ranging from scoring 3s all the way to scoring 8s. That's pretty dramatic. And you can get really aggressive on this hole if you set yourself up with a great tee shot. You're never really out of it on this hole. Even if you're down by 2, you can still make that up on the final hole of the round on this hole if you're willing to really, really press hard and go for that eagle. And multiple people got the eagle last year in not so great condition, so it's definitely doable. And like I said, while this hole is not the most difficult, it is very dynamic and it tempts players of all play styles to play it differently. So that's why I think it's going to be a good finishing hole for this event. Looking at my predictions for the event overall, I think this is going to challenge the entire toolbox of all the players of the field. But there's still a definite predominant theme of favoring distance players and players who are able to control not only how much power they put into their shots, but where those shots are landing. Looking at the weather for the event, it currently kind of looks like there's going to be a bit of rain on Thursday, but relatively nice for the remainder of the event, with just light winds and maybe some small chances of rain here or there, but nothing substantial. Starting on the FPO side, I think we need to recognize real quickly that once again we do have a slightly split field with the European squad not present at this event. So given that, we have another sort of weekend putting pressure on the top of the field to perform. So coming in at third place for me, I've got Missy Gannon here. She's been playing absolutely lights out, 2 wins in a row. I think she has all the skills necessary to even win this event and make it 3 in a row, but the distance factor is what kind of gives me some hesitation and has me putting her behind a couple competitors, but she still, I think, continues to get her solid performance and grabs another podium finish. Coming in at second place, I'm going with Paige Pierce here. She's been playing super well recently with 2 podiums in a row and doing it on different style courses. I mean, the Champions Cup course, I wasn't a whole lot surprised about that, but seeing her perform so well at the Cascade Challenge, I was surprised. That's not a course that I would typically say would fit Paige Pierce, but something is clearly clicking with her game right now, and considering her success with the Portland Open last year, I could see her being kind of in like the top 10 coming out of Milo and then making a real big push the last 2 rounds to take a podium spot. For me, first place here, it's been a couple of 5th place finishes for her since her last win. And I think now is the perfect time for her to put another stamp on the tour. I think Holland Hanley takes the win this weekend. She took down the win at the first Elite Plus event of the year, showcasing her consistency over the 4 rounds of the Open at Austin. She survived Sprinkle Valley hole 18, for goodness sakes, but with the mix of power and control that is required at these 2 courses, I think Holland is a player to watch, and I would love to see her step up and take win number 3 for the season and kind of start challenging that, who's the top dog mentality. So I'd love to see her step up and take care of that. When looking at the MPO side of things, it gets harder and harder every single week, I feel like, to pick winners, because there's so many players on the MPO side who can show up on the podium and so many who can win the events, which is a great thing. I'm so excited about that. But it makes predicting them a bit hard. The only notable player missing that we have here is Niklas Antala. He is not in the field this weekend. But coming in third place for me, I'm going Ricky Raptor Legs Wysocki. I think he's heating up at the right time. You know, his last 3 finishes are 2nd, 5th, and 3rd. And I'm predicting another podium finish here. And then my bold prediction is his first win of the season is going to come in a couple weekends at the Preserve. It's a course he does really, really well at historically. So I think this is another week of sort of putting the fuel in the fire, making sure everything is good to go, and then at the Preserve, he's taken down the win. But I think Ricky has the power and creativity needed to succeed on these courses and take control, and he very well could win this weekend. Something right now feels good about Ricky's game, and we're going to ride that until he tells us and shows us otherwise. Speaking of power, I would be remiss to not put Anthony Barella in 2nd place. Now, before you jump on me, yes, he took 19th place last year at the Portland Open. That's when he told everyone that he's not good with rain. And that his caddy, I guess, spilled water all over his disc golf bag. But I think this is a year for revenge for him. I think he typically catches fire and doesn't let it go out very easily. So coming off of a really big win on a tightly wooded course at the Cascade Challenge a couple weekends ago, it's all he needs to kind of get fired up for this event. So I feel pretty good about picking AB in 2nd place. But do you know who played an even tighter wooded course and won this past weekend? The same guy who's going to come in first this weekend. Gannon Buhr. Gannon Buhr, he won both the Beaver State Fling and the Portland Open last year, with the latter being by 10 strokes. And these tracks just, I think, resonate with his game, and giving him a full extra 4th round just makes Gannon extremely dangerous. So I think we're going to be seeing win number 2 on this season. It's going to happen this weekend. And hold on to your hats. I think we're going to have a really, really fun event to watch. I'm super excited to see who takes it down. Before we get into the PDGA rules, let's take a real quick look at my hold my bag picks for the week. Coming in at tier 1, I got Gannon Buhr, for all the reasons that I just said like 30 seconds ago. So if you want to know, just rewind and rewatch 30 seconds ago. In tier 2, I'm picking Paul McBeth. It was kind of a hard choice to not take Calvin for his consistency, or Simon for like the hot hand pop off from last week. But Paul just feels like the safe pick here over just the course of a 4-round event like this. In tier 3, I'm taking Eagle McMahon. I mean, there's a lot of talent in tier 3. Tier 3 is probably one of the harder ones to really pick from, but I dare you to find anybody in the tier 3 list with better recent finishes than Eagle McMahon has. I think he's starting to sort of heat up, and I'm riding the wave. I'm riding the Eagle McMahon wave because, listen, we know that the sport of disc golf is better when Eagle McMahon is playing well. For tier 4, this is a no-brainer based on stats and finishes. Sullivan Tipton is the most impressive player in this tier by far. This pick was extremely easy. But you know what pick wasn't easy? Tier 5. Tier 5 is the group that just always manages to, I think, really determine who wins this every week. And the weeks that I've done extremely well and hold my bag are the ones where I nail the top pick in tier 5. And I'm going a little gutsy this weekend. I'm picking Dallas Garber. I bet you didn't expect that one. Be honest out there. Let me know in the chat. Do you know who Dallas Garber is? Are you familiar with Dallas Garber? If you're not, he's a pretty young guy sponsored by Stokely Discs, who is an Oregon native, and he's just been crushing it recently. He not that long ago had a 5th place finish at the Las Vegas Challenge and a 2nd place finish this past weekend at the Kayak Point Showdown, where he beat people like the Robinson brothers, Eagle McMahon, Marweed, and pretty much everyone whose name wasn't Gannon Buhr. Technically, he tied with Adam Hammes, but I'm taking this kid on a flyer this week. I'm Team Dallas. You're never going to hear me rooting for Dallas in any other sporting event ever, but for this one this week, I'm going with Dallas. Before we wrap up for this episode, I want to talk briefly about the PDGA rule proposals. As some of you may know, every year the PDGA comes out with proposals for the following year. They usually post it on their website, give everyone a chance to read them, provide feedback on stuff. Well, this year they took a bit of a different approach, and they announced it first on the Staggered Stance podcast on Monday, and a couple other podcasts. They did not appear on any of the foundation stuff for tour life, I think for obvious reasons. But just to be clear, these aren't rules that are going to affect right now. They're proposals for next year. This is going to give us time to sort of sink our teeth in them a little bit and make any kind of suggestions or provide feedback in the positive or negative towards some of these different suggestions. But they have not posted the list at the time of me recording this, but it will be live by the time that you're listening to this video. It can be found over on the PDGA's website. And so for that reason, I'm only going to be talking about the 2 or 3 biggest takeaways here. During the week this week, I'll review the document for any kind of worthwhile things to get into, and we'll talk about them on next week's episode. But I wanted to keep it high level on the really, really big stuff. But that being said, there's a clear agenda here with a number of the rules in this proposal. And that agenda is specifically addressing the pace of play. The first big rule they talk about are determinations. And essentially, determinations are when a disc may or may not be out of bounds. We have to make a determination as a card. Is it in bounds? Is it out of bounds? And with this new proposal, what they're saying is the thrower of the disc can no longer be one of the votes in cases where a determination has to be made regarding things like out of bounds, mismanaged, etc. This is not for things like violations. It's specifically for determination of a ruling on something, like I said, like an out of bounds. So essentially the thrower can't participate. And they're trying to do this to prevent the 2v2 ties where then the benefit goes to the player. They're trying to make this a 3v1 scenario. That way, it's like if it obviously has to be turned over, it takes the entire card to do that. But additionally, they're saying that players who opt to not participate in a vote can be issued a courtesy warning for not choosing a side. That's a little weird, and I think it's a tricky rule. I can see what they're trying to do here, but the problem is that it's not going to stop the thrower from spending the entire walk all the way up the fairway to the lie advocating for their position, and it doesn't change the relationships that all these players already have with each other, and I'm just not sure it's going to change any of the outcomes in any kind of meaningful way. I appreciate what they're trying to go for here. I just don't think it's going to matter all that much. The second rule is all about the time taken for each shot. It's going around the internet as being called the 30-45-30 rule, and that's essentially that all tee shots, top zone shots, and shots from 20 meters and in, that's circle 2 and in, you'll have 30 seconds to complete your throw. That's the way it's been. That's the way it is now. That's standard. But all other shots, you're going to now have 45 seconds to throw. And that's based around the idea that if it's a shot that you can practice consistently, like a tee shot, you're going to practice a tee shot. Drop zone shot, you should practice a drop zone shot. Putting green, you can kind of figure that out. You're a professional, for goodness sake. You'll have a chance to practice those things. And there's a degree of consistency. The lie is the same most of the time. But all the other stuff where you may not have predicted you're going to land in that exact spot, they're giving everyone 45 seconds. And part of the impetus behind this is they're talking about how the idea that a lot of these old rules were written in an era of par 3 disc golf, where on most holes, if you were not putting, you were pitching up into the putting green from 50 or 60 feet outside C2 or something. So as the game has evolved and holes have gotten longer and more complicated, that this is kind of where the thought of this comes from. But the big question generated by this is, when is that time supposed to start? So they address that by saying that the definition of what it means to determine your lie has now been changed to the wording address your lie. And they're saying that addressing your lie is anything that indicates that you're preparing to throw, things like marking your lie or putting a support point behind your lie, doing your pre-shot routine, using a rangefinder, checking the wind, or clearing the ground of obstacles. And the other big problem here is, how do we expect the players to track this in a meaningful way? We're trying to improve pace of play, and we're telling players, we also need you to time everybody's shots. You should probably start doing that. I just don't know that this is as well thought out as they think it is, and hopefully that bears out in the fruit of all the conversation around these rules, and maybe they do something different. I'm not sure. The last major thing they added was the idea of time extensions. And this one's interesting to me because They were saying that last year they got a lot of backlash for suggesting time extension, so they pulled it. But they felt it was important enough to bring it up again this year, but kind of with some differences to it. And essentially what they're saying is they would allow a player to 2 times per round take a 30-second time extension to their throwing time of 30, 45, or 30, based on the rule that we just talked about above. But if it takes longer than the normal amount of time to throw, card mates are now obligated to call that player for using a time extension. And if they go past that time extension, they have to issue an extensive time warning. If both your extensions are already gone, going over leads to an automatic stroke penalty. Here's the thing though. We kind of go back to the same problem. And that's, do we really expect players to be timing all these shots and calling it? One, it's hard enough to get them to call things, let alone do the job to track it, consistently and regularly. They don't call anything now. And I think this is going to result in players deliberately taking the time they want until their card mates decide to call anything on them, which I don't think is going to happen that often, despite the PDGA saying that's going to. They're saying that they got a lot of buy-in from the Players Council. If you want a real heated conversation, go listen to Tour Life this week, because Brody, Yuli, and I get into a pretty heated conversation. Brody and Yuli get he gets fired up. It's the most fired up I've seen Yuli in a long time. But there's an argument to be made that they're suggesting that there are players who this is going to be the perfect way for them to start calling more players on time stuff. But I just don't see it happening. How are we going to be timing this? I made the joke that they're going to be putting stopwatches in all the player packs. It just, to me, it feels like they're trying to solve the problem with more rules when a system that works pretty well kind of already exists in another sport. And so what I mean by that is, I know there's always a lot of flack for, hey, we compare our sport to golf too much, but golf has kind of already figured out a system for how to keep pace of play appropriate between cards, and it's very loosely, without getting into the nitty gritty details here. There is an expected pace of play that is monitored throughout the course for the different groups that are playing. And if a group is not meeting that expected pace of play time, whether it's the amount of space between cards or the expected time to finish the round, whatever it may be, then someone goes to that group and gets them to speed up and kind of puts them on notice that, hey, you can be penalized if your group doesn't hurry up. And so I think that because this system has been already well vetted at a larger scale, it would be much easier to implement something like this, because you got to look at the infrastructure of what we have in the disc golf community. We don't have the ability to have everyone time everyone. It's not going to happen. We only have, according to Doug Bierkes, we only have 5 or 6 marshals at any given event. So what they should be doing is establishing an overall pace of play that's expected, watching the PDGA live for gaps to begin forming in the field, and then when you have a card that is 3 holes behind, send a marshal out to that card, have them talk to the card, say, hey guys or gals, what's going on? And that card can say, well, so-and-so is taking a minute on every single putt, and they're taking forever. Or it may be that they're just taking a long time and kind of meandering through the course. And that marshal can now hang with that card and let that player know, hey, if you keep doing this, I'm here. I'm gonna call you on a violation every time you take over that 30 seconds, because we got to speed this up. Or if it's a whole card thing, hey guys, you're all going to be subject to a penalty if you don't speed up your pace of play. You need to play faster, and we expect you to get to this hole by this time. So I think that system would work a whole lot better. I think anyone suggesting that it's an impossible system because it's just too complicated, read the rules that are proposed, that they're doing now, that they're proposing for 2026. Way more complicated. There's no way they're going to be able to be implemented in any kind of fair way. It's going to be crazy. It's just going to be crazy. But hey, that does it for our episode today. Thank you so much for jumping in, coming along, and listening to all this stuff with us. I have a blast doing this every single week, even though some weeks I'm pretty busy in this. I won't tell you what time I'm recording this, but it's late. So I hope everyone's having a great week. I hope you're all excited to watch some good disc golf this upcoming weekend at the Northwest Disc Golf event. And yeah, let me know in the comment section which of the two courses are you more excited to see, the Milo MacIver course or Glendoveer East, or which of the two courses would you want to play of those two? Let me know. And if you could leave me a like, a subscription, it's the best way to help the channel out, help us grow, help us, be able to do more things for you guys. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.